Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dan Solomon, and I welcome you on behalf of the Acorn Scholarship Fund, which sponsors this series of seminars. And as always, we begin by saying, please check your cell phones, which I just did, just remembered to do. So how did this all happen? Well, the Acorn Scholarships brighten the futures for many of our Cyprus associates, and it's in that spirit that we've been hosting this series of seminars that consider what that future world might look like. And so topics that we've had included the impact of artificial intelligence, the future of our food, and the most recent one was on globally declining human birth rates. And today we're turning to the future of our environment to ask if we can really save the rainforests, the health of which has profound implications for the future of all life on Earth. We are absolutely honored to have an international expert on that topic with us today, a renowned scientist and explorer who's credited with founding the scientific discipline of tree canopy ecology and has implemented, not just talked about, has implemented a plan to protect the world's rainforests. Dr. Meg Lowman, affectionately known across the world as CanopyMeg, devoted 45 years exploring forest canopies in 45 countries, where she not only saves forests, but she mentors girls. She's won numerous awards, published about 200 scientific papers, about a dozen books. In fact, the latest of which I think is due to come out tomorrow. That's what it'll look like, called Tree Day. Actually, an early book, which I found is one of her early books, which I found especially compelling and very candid, was called Life in the Treetops, Adventures of a Woman in Field Biology. Meg's current position is as executive director of the not-for-profit Tree Foundation that's based in Sarasota, Florida, where she was a few hours ago. And she's actually been in the country almost the whole week now, right? Yeah. And as she'll explain, central to her strategy is to build public canopy walkways in endangered forests around the world, in part to replace logging with ecotourism as an income source for the indigenous populations. And having had, I'll be careful not to tear up at this one, having had the privilege of being on such a walkway with Meg, high up in the canopy in the Amazon rainforest of Peru, I can attest to its awe. And then watching barges filled with trees on the river below, the power of that experience really moves you to do something. Meg has a North Carolina connection. She was recruited to be the founding director of the Nature Research Center of the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. So the Nature Research Center is that building down on Jones Street with the big globe, the Earth, the Daily Planet. And in that role, Meg led the recruitment of the other scientists who would lead the museum's laboratories in a range of scientific areas, including astrophysics, biodiversity, paleontology, and so on. And I would note that more than 50% of those hired were women. Oh, and Meg's position was joint between the museum and North Carolina State University. We've got two of Meg's books here today, if you're interested in having her, if you want to look at them and have her sign. One of them sort of chronicles her story, and it's called The Arbornaut, as in astronaut. This is The Arbornaut. And the other is for those of us with grandchildren or great-grandchildren, and it's called The Leaf Detective. So please welcome Dr. CanopyMeg Lowman.
reaching out. You can take. It's a little static in the background here, so I'm just trying to fix the lavalier here, make sure. Okay, testing, how's that? Less static. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. What a pleasure. It's really an honor to be here. What Dan didn't say is he was my boss. When your boss calls you and says, come up and speak, of course you come. But I'm really so honored. He was absolutely the best boss ever. And living in Raleigh was the highlight of my life. It's a fantastic community. That Science Museum was just so, so special. So you're in a wonderful place. I'm in awe of all of you. But I do have one quiz question that I'm going to ask, if I can change the slide here. Raise your hand if you've ever climbed a tree in your whole life. Oh my gosh, look at this. Everyone gets an A+. So technically that means all of you are arbonauts, just like me. And as Dan mentioned, astronauts explore outer space, aquanauts explore undersea, and arbonauts climb to the top of the trees. And these are some of my youthful arbonauts in my little hometown, which is called Elmira, New York. Anybody ever heard of that? I don't know why. The biggest industry is a prison, but never mind. It's a tiny town, but we have the Meg Lowman Treetops Camp, and a lot of underprivileged girls every year come, and I teach them to climb trees and visit my old haunts. And even over here, we have a walkway in Florida that I built, and these third graders, pictured there, discovered a new species of beetle by drawing pictures of leaves and what lived on the leaves. So they got to be published scientists at the age of 9. So the moral of that story is you don't need a PhD to be a scientist always. So we have lots of amazing opportunity, I think, for kids to bond them with nature through the world of arbonauts. At least I hope so. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm just still in awe of having played a very small role in your community by being part of the construction and fundraising, and as Dan mentioned, the staffing of that Daily Planet, which I still think is the best science museum in the world. It's so unique. We broadcast from that sphere all over the state of North Carolina and further. We broadcast actually all over the world at the opening. So it is a fantastic resource that you have right here accessible to you. So there he is, my mentor. There he is on the top of the world. That is 125 feet in the canopy of the Amazonian rainforest in Peru. And behind him is another new species of beetle we discovered eating the bromeliads and all kinds of important things. But it really was great that we were able to bring people from Raleigh and elsewhere down to these different places in the world that are so special and important because they are disappearing. I wore this on the plane. All the people in Atlanta said, wow, you look bright and cheerful. And I said, because I'm speaking about the rainforest today, which is kind of a depressing subject. So I thought I better dress cheerfully. Anyway, a lot of you, raise your hand if you grew up in the temperate forests. In other words, if you grew up somewhere where leaves change color in the fall. Oh my gosh. So you see, most of us grew up like my backyard in Elmira, which is maple trees turning red and birch trees turning yellow. And lo and behold, I never knew when I was a kid that something like 75% of the world is tropical in what we call evergreen forests, where the leaves don't fall off in the winter and it doesn't snow. And so this was amazing to me as a kid. And I only learned that by reading National Geographic magazine. Remember that in the good old days? I think now it's digital probably, but I can remember those copies coming to the mailbox and seeing these pictures of these amazing green canopies. And lo and behold, a whole lot of the world is down there near the tropical equator, and the leaves stay on the trees all the time. So that little curiosity kind of gave me a start for my career, as well as playing outside in little old Elmira, New York. So here's my one kind of embarrassing slide, but there I am as a geeky 5th grader, and I collected wildflowers. I actually didn't really know a lot about science because there wasn't a museum in Elmira, New York, but I pressed them in something called a telephone book. Do you remember those things when they were paper? I know, I show that, I tell kids that, and they look at their phone and they go like, Dr. Lowman, how did you put the flowers in your phone? You know, so today it's different, but those telephone books made a fabulous plant press, and so I collected hundreds of flowers. My dad was so kind to stop the car on the side of the road when I saw a new one, and lo and behold, my teacher encouraged me to take it to the New York State Science Fair, where, as you can see the statistics, almost all the other kids were male because girls just didn't do science in my generation. And a lot of those boys had something, remember this one called the volcano experiment? You put the vinegar in and it popped up, and that auditorium was raucous with these boys exploding their volcanoes and me standing with my pressed wildflowers scared out of my wits. But anyway, I got a second prize. It was a miracle. And again, not saying a word, but I got a little plastic trophy that made me feel maybe for a minute that girls could do science, which was really great. And my next door neighbor was another funny kid. Our town was kind of pretty average, but I don't know if you recognize this guy, but his name is Tommy Hilfiger. He was our paper boy, and his sister Betsy and I were the babysitters for everyone in the neighborhood. And he and I were two of the only people that really left Elmira. All my girlfriends are still there, and most of the families. And Tommy, of course, was very passionate about fashion. I was very passionate about plants. So when I talk to kids in schools, which I do all the time, I always say, you should follow your dreams, do what you love, and see if you can make a career out of it. But if you like fashion, definitely pursue it, because you could afford to save the rainforest better than being a botanist. But anyway, it's all good. He sponsors the Meg Lowman Treetops Camp, and then I climb the trees. So there you go. So this became my life's career, which was studying these mysteries of leaves, in particular, why did those tropical trees have leaves that stay on the tree all year? And how in the heck are we going to get up the tree? Because you can't climb a 200-foot high tree the same way that I was climbing trees in little old Elmira, New York. So this kind of became my toolkit over time, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that and then move on to talk about the serious stuff, which is how in the heck are we going to save this place. So I did publish a book, as Dan said. It's been translated into different languages. Next year it's coming out in Spanish. I have to go to Barcelona for the opening of the Spanish book. I'm pretty excited about that because I don't know if you've been to Barcelona, but Gaudi is an architect that really worshiped trees. So I usually go and lecture at the architecture school there because they really love trees, which is such a heartening kind of experience for me as a funky botanist. But here's how we used to study trees. And the amazing thing is most foresters for the last 200 years only looked at trees from ground level. And that meant, you know, if you could stand on a little fence, maybe you could reach a leaf 8 feet high. But for the most part, it means that about 95% of the tree was out of sight, unless you cut the tree down. And if you did that, probably the insects would get squished and the birds would fly away. So nobody really had a sense of the whole tree. And so lo and behold, when I was a graduate student in Australia, which I went there because I got a scholarship and also because I read in my National Geographic that Australia had rainforest, I thought, how in the heck can I study the whole tree? And I went to my advisor with a great idea. I said, how about if I train a monkey? And they could go up the tree for me and sample the leaves and the fruits and bring them all down to the ground. And he said, no, I don't think that's a good idea. He said, I think you have to figure out how to go up the tree, because I really wanted to know how long those evergreen leaves lived in the tropical tree, which was different from my maple leaves in Elmira, New York. So I made myself a slingshot out of a piece of metal, and I sewed this crazy harness out of seatbelt webbing by borrowing an kind of professional sewing machine, and I borrowed some ropes from the caving club at Sydney University and a few pieces of hardware, and that's the first tree I ever climbed. It's called a coachwood in Australia, and I was really scared. I thought surely I would die, or there would be ants up there that would eat me alive. I wasn't really sure what was up there, but I got to the top of that first tree, and everything's up there. It turns out this is a huge hotspot of everything. Birds eating insects, and insects eating leaves, and insects pollinating flowers, and iguanas eating the insects, and other things coming after the birds. So it was an amazing experience. And I went on later and climbed this tall, great kapok tree in the Amazon, and trees all over the world, as Dan mentioned, because it was a very simple method. All these gear cost just a couple $100 at most to buy the rope. And so it was very portable and very easy to become an arbornaut with this type of gear. And I got pretty good with the slingshot too, so that was super fun. Today, some of my students have taken it to the next level. This is Anthony, and he's studying redwood trees in California. Anybody ever seen a redwood tree? Ooh, so you know this is over 300 feet high. Anthony has to put his slingshot up the first 50 feet, then he climbs up and he slingshots again the next 50 feet, and again about 6 times to get him way up here at the top of the redwood tree. And he discovered that redwoods don't need water from the soil. Did you know that? Redwoods take in water from fog straight into their leaves. They also use water from soil, but the good news is the fog can feed these leaves at 300 feet height, so that straw effect of the water doesn't have to go so high. Now the scary thing is, with the changing climate, as you might realize, fog is disappearing in California, so that puts the redwoods at a little bit of risk. But he's way up there in those trees doing really wonderful things. Here are some of my students in Taiwan. Anybody ever been to Taiwan? Anybody climb trees in Taiwan? Oh, just thought that was extra credit. But these are the same height. They have amazingly fantastic trees in Taiwan, and the students look so tiny that I put circles around them so you could see them. But again, nobody had ever looked at what lives in trees in Taiwan before these students used their ropes and their slingshots to go up in the tree, which is fantastic. One of my students wanted to study sloths, and he said, you know what? Have you ever heard about sloths? Do you think they're active or do you think they're lazy? Lazy, right. Everybody thinks sloths are lazy. Well, if you look in the literature, sloths were studied in laboratory cages where they measured how often they slept. And they slept about 16 hours a day in these little itty bitty cages. And if you were in a cage all day, what would you do? You'd probably sleep. So Bryson went up and he caught these sloths and he put little neurotransmitters on their head, and he found out that sloths really only sleep about 7 hours a day because they're actively eating leaves all day long. So the good news is he saved the reputation of the sloths, but the bad news is it's too late because everybody still uses that word to imply someone's a little bit lazy. But again, just with this business of ropes and slingshots, we can answer a whole lot of questions that nobody ever knew the answers to before. And you can have a little bit of fun if you like too, if you're really adventurous as a student. One thing that happened to me, which was kind of crazy, remember I said I wanted to study how long leaves lived in the canopy of the tropical rainforest. Well, when I first started doing this project for my PhD, I numbered all these leaves, thousands of leaves, and every month I went back and checked them. And every time I went, something had eaten part of the leaf. Have you ever seen leaves with holes in your garden and you get a little cranky because you're like, gosh darn it, these insects are eating my beautiful plants? And I was really frustrated about that. I couldn't find the insects for about 2 years. Every month I checked the leaves and I never saw any insects, but I would see the holes. And one night, thanks to my bladder, I had to get up and go to the bathroom at 2 a.m. and I heard all this noise over my head. And it turned out that all the insects were eating at night and not by day. Now, why do you think insects would like to eat at night and not by daylight? Yes. Oh my gosh, we've got all these brilliant people because they wouldn't get eaten by the birds. So it was such a, I call it hit you over the head science. I wished I'd thought of it 2 years before, but finally I figured out I had to climb at night to catch the insects in the act of eating my leaves, which I then did a little bit more. And that made me realize that sometimes it was a little scary to climb on the rope at night because you didn't know what was up there, snakes, ants that might bite you. And so this led to the thought of, what about building some kind of a trail in the treetops? And so this is the first one that I helped design, and it's in Queensland, Australia. Here's another quiz. Anybody ever been to Lamington National Park in Australia? That's a pretty hard one, but it's in Queensland. It's a beautiful national park if you get to Australia. And we built with the owner of an ecotourist lodge this first walkway that really allowed people to study all kinds of things by nighttime, by daytime. It allowed children to be in the canopy safely without dangling from a harness and making their moms nervous. So it was a really wonderful invention. And I came back to the States as a professor at Williams College and built a small one in the college forest where some of my students made amazing discoveries. This student discovered a predator of the gypsy moths. Guess what? It was the flying squirrel eating all the larvae. So that was a new discovery, and he published a paper and got a great scholarship to graduate school. So we had this little walkway in the college forest, which led to a lot of new things that we were finding out about these good old temperate forests. And oh, I forgot to tell you the result of my thesis in Australia. How long do you think a tropical leaf lived on the tree? 1 year is a good guess, but it's wrong. But, you know, it's 6 months to 8 months, say, in the temperate forest, as you know. So it is longer in the tropics. So you're on the right track, but a little longer than that. It's a hard question. It's in my book. Maybe I shouldn't tell you the answer, but I will. 20 years. Some leaves, not all, some did live 1 year, but the longest leaves lived 20 years. Isn't that amazing? So that just shows you how different the knowledge of our forests is. If we grow up here in the temperate zones, we assume everything is a certain way, but in the tropics, it's really, really different. So then I moved to Florida and became a botanical garden director down in Sarasota, and everybody found out about these walkways in my past, and they said, well, we want one in Florida too. So we fundraised and built the first public treetop walk outside of Sarasota, Florida. Anybody ever been to that one? Maybe one or two. Hooray, Bob, thank you. And so that's been an amazing experience because it's free. It's open to the public. Anybody who pays $5 can go there, and it has a tower, and that's a fabulous view. And if you're a kid growing up in Florida, it's really flat. So most kids get up the tower and they can't believe it. They've never seen height. They all shout, "Mommy, I can see forever." It's really quite exciting for kids to experience being above the canopy. And this walkway has, over time, generated about $30 million a year in tourism for Southwest Florida with visitors and hotels and restaurants. And it attracts about 500,000 people, which is part of the idea I'll discuss later about how could we use ecotourism maybe to save some of our rainforests. It's certainly helpful for those forests in Florida to give people an education about them. And again, here are my third grade rock stars that discovered the new beetle that I told you about and became scientists at the age of 9 because they made observations in the treetops. And here's our walkway in the Amazon where Dan went. And every July, I just came back a little bit ago, I take a group of people there. Bob Bilbro's in the audience. He's been down with me to trips, and Dan has been as well. But we take what we call citizen scientists, volunteers who come and help count bugs, or maybe they go out at night with a flashlight and find new species, or maybe they just lie in the hammock. And because we're there, we hire indigenous women and guides and give people an economy without cutting down the trees, which is super, super important indeed. And now we have new walkways going around the world. This is Penang, Malaysia. It's a fantastic, beautiful walkway, which again is given so much inspiration to people. You've been there. Oh, raise your hands. I better ask. Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. You went there. And this walkway, in order to save those forests, I led something called a BioBlitz. Have you ever heard of that before? It's a little activity. You could do it here where you pick a day, maybe a Saturday, and you say, we're going to count all the butterflies in the garden, or we're going to go out and count all the bugs in the forest. And so we took 2 weeks and brought in 100 scientists and counted everything that lived on this hillside. And it was over 1,500 things. So it was so great that we were able to submit the list to the UNESCO World Heritage and give this a UNESCO Biological Reserve status. So that means forever and ever, long after all of us are in the grave, this will be a rainforest in perpetuity. So that was fantastic and a great thing for the Canopy Walkway to be part of that process. Another tool, now remember we've got ropes and harnesses with a slingshot, tool number 1. We've got canopy walkways is tool number 2. Some places we have these construction cranes is tool number 3. This is in Panama. There's a few of these in Germany. They're mostly in countries that have a bigger economy. They can't afford to have them in Ethiopia or Uganda or places like that. But in the bucket of this crane arm, you can float around and you can count all the bugs or all the sloths, or you can monitor what's being eaten or what's being photosynthesized. So it's a really great tool, but it's very limited because it's expensive to put in place and it's expensive to have a driver, which many countries can't afford to do. But it is a great tool for certain kinds of research. And here I am in a crane in Australia, of course, counting all the bugs on the leaves, which was fantastic for me to do. And fourthly, the fourth tool in my toolkit is inflatable gadgets. And we have this amazing dirigible that we use on expeditions sometimes. And it has a cute little raft that we take and float around and sample trees and then move to the next tree and the next tree, and that's fantastic. But there is a little story here. These expeditions are very competitive. We take about 50 people at once. And the first time I applied to go was in Cameroon, Africa, which is here. And as you can see from the data, 49 men and 1 woman were on this expedition, but I had applied as M. Lowman, not as Margaret, and I got in. And I think you girls all know where I'm going on this. When I got to that base camp at 2 a.m. in the morning, oh my gosh, the expletives in French and German, they were so upset. They thought I was Michael or Matthew. They did not know I was a girl. So I got in sort of a little sneaky, but in the end, it was a great experience, and I think it opened the door for more women to be part of these expeditions in the future. And they were so ungrateful, these people, that I'll show you a little story. Oh, this is the big raft that we could climb up. You can see me up there climbing through a little porthole to study my bugs at night, which was extremely handy that I could sleep up there. I could live up there practically. It was so cool. This is like a trampoline mesh here that we would use. But the guys in the camp, the 49 men, gave me this hammock, which was the one on the end, and this Gabon viper, which is deadly poisonous, lived right here. So I think you understand what their intent was. I didn't get bitten, I'm very happy to say, but there were a lot of those kind of little issues where I had to prove as a girl that I could do these things, and that's kind of the stories in my book that I wrote about. Dan mentioned I gave some, adventures and kind of stories about being a woman in science, which was probably a little bit different in the good old days, and hopefully it's getting better now. Other methods I've used in my life, this is surveying trees in Bhutan, which is pretty fun to be on the back of an elephant. Sometimes we put little gadgets up in trees to hear sounds, and sometimes we use drones to make maps over the top, but nothing substitutes for really being there and seeing the bug and watching it eat, or observing the sloth and figuring out how many leaves it actually eats. You can't collect that kind of data with aerial surveying, but we sure have some interesting tools now for students of the future to use in the forest canopy. One of the things that I've been pretty passionate about, as Dan mentioned earlier, is inclusivity in science. And as a museum director and also as a professor, it's always been important to get girls involved. But there's a lot of groups that get excluded. And one of the ones that I really worked hard with was kids that were mobility limited. All those kids that can't really walk on a forest trail usually get told, you have to stay inside and take the notes while the rest of us go out and do all the fun stuff. So I tried to figure out a way. I got some funding from Federal National Science Foundation grants to invent some gear like pulleys and different ways that we could get kids that were wheelchair bound to become arbonauts. And we did that, and it was fantastic. And they all discovered new species in the canopy of trees in Kansas and trees in North Carolina. Nothing fancy. We did do redwoods, and they sampled something like 50,000 water bears in redwoods. Anybody know what a water bear is? That's a really advanced question. Dan does, but it's a little cute microscopic thing. You'll have to Google it if you have a computer. Water bear. It's a little microscopic organism that floats in the water column, and it does look like a cute little bear. If you have a grandchild, I promise you they know all about them because they're the most extremophile animal on the planet. They've been on the moon launches. They're the ones that escaped from that Indian satellite that crashed, and the whole colony got out, so we think maybe they're living up there. But they're very resilient creatures, so check it out later. But out of all of this work by students of all walks of life and all diversities, we now know that over half of everything that lives on Earth is in the top of a tree. So that means, I promise you, on this property called the cypress, you probably have 10 new species of insect living right out there, or water bear, or something you might not know about, maybe a moss, maybe a lichen, because probably less than 10% of any treetop organisms have ever been observed in North Carolina. So it's a whole new world of exploration. It's really akin to going to the moon in a lot of ways. So that leads me to the fact that these trees that house all these species really are a multi-million-dollar machine right outside of your window. And this is where we need to go when we're thinking about, can we save the rainforest? All of these trees are really a giant condominium housing thousands of species. And as you sleep, they're a very healthy system. You don't have to go out there and pay them. You don't have to repair their pipes. You don't have to give them too much fertilizer. Maybe once in a while you do, but for the most part, they're a very healthy organism that supports millions of creatures on Earth. And all of these trees do these things for us. They keep our freshwater system healthy with all their leaves. They produce oxygen for us. They give us timber and so many foods and clothing. Can you think of any food you get from a tree? Nuts, yeah. Fruits, oranges, maple syrup, all right. I'm still waiting for my favorite thing. Avocado. My next favorite thing. Huh? Maple syrup is a good one. Dates is a great one. Don't forget chocolate. Chocolate comes from trees, isn't it? I mean, let's face it, that's pretty important, isn't it? Anyway, trees give us medicines. Over half of our medicines had their origin in plant chemicals. Trees conserve the soil with their root systems, and we now know they're home. A late paper that I just read a month ago said maybe 80% of species come from forests, not just 50, so it's huge. They store carbon for us, and they control our climate by keeping, you know how it is in the shade of a tree? It's not as hot or extreme as it is in the sun with pavement. And finally, they give about 6 billion people a spiritual heritage. Not so much in North America, unfortunately, but lots of countries in Africa and Asia, including India, have very close spiritual connections to trees that I will talk about. in a minute. So with all of this, we have to say to ourselves, why on earth are we cutting down trees? And the latest data in 2024 was that 18 soccer fields a minute, to make it a real vision in your head, are being cut down. So can we really save rainforests? I'm going to just give an ad hoc survey because I'm interested. Raise your hand if you think, yes, we can save the rainforest for our children and grandchildren. Can we? Yes, that you think we can. Okay, raise your hand if you think we can't save the rainforest for our children. I'm going to be true confession here that I'm not positive, but when I speak to kids, I always say yes. I say, yes, we can. We have to be hopeful as much as anything possible, but I'm going to share a few pieces of data with you that make me lose a bit of hope, but then I'm going to share an idea with you that gives me more hope. So that's how I'm vacillating. So this is a tricky subject indeed. So first of all, we know that there are about 5 things that cause rainforests to disappear, and a big one is logging. We need timber, and it's a really important industry in North Carolina, and my son actually operates a timber mill up in Vermont, so I'm coming from a family of timber people, but the good news is we can manage that carefully. The bad news is when you cut a tropical rainforest down, there's no nutrients left. When you cut trees down in North Carolina and Vermont, the soil is still rich, but in Brazil and Peru, all the nutrients are in the logs, in the leaves. You follow that? So people get fooled because they say, oh, look at these big trees. We better cut them down and we'll make money from them and then we'll grow it back again. But it won't grow back again. So that's a huge problem for tropical rainforests. We're looking at hundreds, probably thousands of years to recreate a rainforest in an area that has been clear-cut in Brazil or Peru. So really, really difficult. So what can we do as citizens? Can we control tropical clear-cutting? Do you think we can do something from the Cyprus or from Florida where I live? Have you ever heard of any good programs to save logs or keep people from clearing?
Organizations like Conservation International and various 501c3s that I hope.
Right. That's a great idea. We can try to support organizations that are down there on the ground trying to do things. I'm sure you've all read about, say, some of the leadership in Brazil a few years ago was very anxious to clear cut, and yet we had good organizations trying to combat that. So we can do our best to support it. It is tough. And the other good idea that I'll share a little more with you is this ecotourism one that I'm mentioning. If we can bring income to those local people without selling the logs, maybe that will help. But thank you for volunteering. It's just slim, isn't it? We can't all go there and hug those trees and protect them and guard them. We have to really rely on some economic factors that would turn this around, because it's probably not going to be the case that people save a tree for the oxygen. I don't want to be extreme, but would you kind of agree with me on that? That probably sitting here, we're not going to say we need to save a tree in Brazil for the oxygen. It just isn't connecting to the education system in the Western countries at this point in time. So another big factor that's killing these rainforest trees is fires and killing forests everywhere. So we have all kinds of acreage being burned, and it's hard to even envision what 78 million acres looks like. But the good and the bad news is that most of these Canadian forest fires are being caused by climate change. They're being caused by drying events and the landscape being in a drought condition, not by humans dropping a cigarette, because there aren't a whole lot of people in northern Manitoba. So we can track the sources of a lot of these burns. In the tropical forests, unfortunately, people do burn to clear the land for agriculture. So that's a huge problem, because as you now know, when you burn this canopy and these logs, you don't have any nutrients left to grow your crops. So that's a huge problem that we have to educate people about. But it seems tricky because nobody seems to be listening to that. So we have to think hard about how can we reduce fires, and that's a pretty tough thing to wrangle with. Can we do something about global climate? Holy cow, it's getting more and more depressing, isn't it? Because how can we as individuals help global climate? Here's a country that I work in a lot, Ethiopia, which is now suffering extreme drought and extreme tree diebacks and deaths, and not able to really plant trees back again in this kind of landscape. So how on earth do we try to return the forests that used to be there, which now are less than 5% of their forests are left compared to what was there 50 years ago? And it's so hard to know how to reverse that type of thing in a country where the people are living on less than $1 a day. So they don't have the funds for conservation, and they don't really have the weather to grow the trees. So, oh my gosh, what are we going to do for them? Toxins. A lot of mining is now popular in places like the Amazon, mining for gold and mining for other things, drilling for oil, and there is a lot of remnant toxins from all of these practices, and there's a huge loss of all the mammals in these forests. The word bushmeat refers to the fact that logging teams and mining teams come in and they hunt the animals to get food. They're out in the middle of nowhere. They can't go to the grocery store, obviously, so they hunt out the forests, and maybe 500 years is required to bring back the animals to these districts. So we have a kind of a double whammy. We have the toxins and we have the loss of a lot of species. So this is a huge issue that we have to think about. How can we possibly control that? Can we have oversight to some of these areas? Can we have sort of an EPA that's global that goes down and helps people have clean processes to keep the forests healthy? And that's a pretty daunting process too. All right, here's one for all of us. We can all participate. But one of the reasons that people are cutting down these forests is for beef, for soy, for corn, for harvesting timber, for making something called palm oil. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of palm oil. Oh, good people. And that is in probably your chairs, definitely your nail polish, your lipstick, your shampoo, your clothes, if there's anything besides 100% cotton. And so every time we buy something, we're causing the rainforest to get cut down, because now they're clearing to create these palm oil plantations because Americans want to buy products with palm oil. And it's really hard to see it as an ingredient in most of what you buy, because it has about 30 different names by manufacturers. So every time we consume, we're probably contributing to the rainforest, and it's really to the loss of the rainforest. It's very hard to know how can we stop that without having a clear label on everything we buy and doing something about that. In economics, I mentioned earlier, as I said, can we educate the public about how valuable a forest is and help them save it? You know, kids really get it. Kids love trees, kids save trees. In my little tree foundation, most of my donors are fifth graders because they know the value of a tree and they want to help out. But it's very hard for politicians and adults to understand why trees are so important, and we have projects like building roads and building new shopping centers that always cause trees to get cut down. So we do have a lot of issues in trying to change our culture to being a tree conservation type of culture. And finally, agriculture. And this one keeps me awake at night because, number one, Americans waste about 30% of our food. Have you ever read about that? That we don't eat, we don't have a clean plate club anymore. My dad used to make us have a clean plate club. I think it was terrible with our vegetables, but we did it. But we not only waste food, but we obviously grow a lot. And quite honestly, we're going to need genetically modified crops. We're going to need all kinds of technology if we can farm enough food for 8 billion people without cutting all the rest of the forest down. So here's a huge ethical dilemma. How do we get enough food, and yet how do we not cut the whole forests of the world down to plant enough food. So a really, really tough issue indeed. And last but not least, we have lots of cities and urban life, and we all know that with cities come roads and cement and paving and pollution and other things that are associated with how our lifestyle seems to be. So all of these things are working against trees. So this is the challenge that I want to leave you with, and I hate to leave you in the terrible, depressing mood. You'll have to drink twice as many glasses of wine tonight. That's your one savior. It's a very good plant product. But I do want to talk a little bit about this one solution that I've been working on in hopes that maybe you can think of a few other solutions, and you can call me or write me or do anything. But I've spent, as Dan said, 45 years working in lots of countries on this issue of how to help local people save their forests, and then come home to America where most people don't even understand what deforestation is coming from or doing or related to. So it's this very complex issue about how we can really work at it. But the one thing I have learned, I learned from my marine biology friends. And this is Sylvia Earle. She's a good explorer friend. And she started a project in 2010 to create hope spots, she calls them, these places in the ocean where she brings attention to them. This is an important place. Lots of fish live here. Save it. This is an important mangrove swamp because lots of shrimp get their birth rights here, so save them. So she's been trying to create interest in saving important parts of our marine world. So I asked Sylvia, could I start a partner program with her? And I'm calling it Mission Green, which is to take those most important forests. We know what they are because we scientists have measured them. And let's start there. Let's save the ones that are almost extinct or house the most species or the most chocolate or whatever it is that you want to use as your measurement. And we can partner with the local people. We can partner with Conservation International or some of those other groups to help save these forests. And I was really lucky to have this wonderful colleague of mine that helped me start this program. E.O. Wilson was a biodiversity expert at Harvard. Unfortunately, he's deceased now, but he and I worked out what those 10 important forests should be. He put them in a book that he wrote called Half Earth, where he believed we should save half the earth for 99% of species and leave the other half for Homo sapiens, which was kind of a clever idea. Except I said, Ed, we can't just leave the poor half for the species. We have to make sure we save some of the good half for the species. So that's why we realized we have to identify where these important forests really are that need saving. And so we did that. And this plan that I'm trying to execute now is 10 by 10 by 10 by 10. It's to raise $10 million. We're halfway there to build 10 canopy walkways, to identify these walkways in the most endangered 10 forests of the world, to employ 10 times 10 equals 100 local women and families, and hopefully get 10 by 10 by 10, maybe 1,000 students over the lifetime of the walkway to do research there and make exploration. So these walkways now are getting close to success. We have a walkway in the subtropical forests of Florida. We have a walkway in the Amazon. We have a great walkway in the sequoias in California. Who's been there? Eureka, California. Good for you. Hooray. We have plans for a walkway in this endangered Mata Atlantica forest in Brazil, which is going ahead. We have a partnership with the Cherokee Nation to build a walkway in Cherokee, North Carolina, because the Great Smokies is the most biodiverse forest in all of North America. Right in your backyards, you have the most amazing forests of the whole continent. We have a plan and a site for Mozambique. We have a plan and a site for Madagascar. And we have a completed walkway in Malaysia and a plan and a site in Bhutan. And 3 sites in India. There's 1.2 billion people in India. So guess what? We need 3 walkways. So otherwise it'll be overcrowded, right? Anyway, so that's what we're trying to do. It's very exciting. We're working really hard now on Madagascar because, again, there's less than 5% of their forests left. That's really urgent. In the next 10 years, there might be 0 if we don't do something about that. So that's why we're prioritizing these different forests. And hopefully by 2030, or whenever I go to the grave, which may be sooner rather than later, Dan, I think you'll outlive me because I've climbed too many trees, right? We would have these walkways done. We just started a training program in the Amazon with women guides, which is really exciting. And we have other aspects of these walkways that are helping save the forest, because when the local people get a benefit from keeping the trees, you and I know that it's even safer than Conservation International sending money from Washington, D.C. You know what I mean? Even though we love what they do, to be down there as the stewards is the best way to save these forests. And so I'm going to end on a little hope note, but here's one of my hope spots. These are the forests in Ethiopia. Again, less than 5% left. Do you see? You can see where the trees are, right? You can see where their trees were, but they're no longer. So this is called a church forest. Can you see the church in the middle? So in Ethiopia, they believe that the priest is in charge of the human spirit, but also all of God's creatures. They feel so sorry for us. When I showed them a picture of my church, when I went over and met with the priests, what surrounds my church, do you think? Cement parking lot. They said, your country's so poor because your priests don't have any of God's creatures to look after. They couldn't believe how poor we were. So it's so interesting because that's their mission. But something bad is happening here, and that is the cattle are getting in and nibbling, and the people in the villages are taking the edge trees for firewood a little bit, and they're starting to plant a little coffee in the understory here. So they are losing these last little circles of forest, which is really scary. So in helping them to develop a solution, here's the Google Earth image of Ethiopia. It's downright depressing, isn't it? And that's a close-up of that little forest we just saw. So what we're trying to do here, which is a little different, is just quickly partner us as scientists with the priests. And all this means is developing trust. We can't really go into other countries and save forests without building trust. So I have done a lot of hours of prayer in Ethiopia, not collecting data about bugs or leaves, but praying and getting to know the priests. And over time, we've made workshops with the priests, and they've come to trust me. In some way, being a female is a more trusted person. So when I go there, they don't think I'm about to do anything radical or rash. They really think having a female is a very trusted partner. So I'm grateful for this. Finally, my gender has come in handy. Over time, we've educated them about the fact that there are no other trees outside of their church forest, which none of these priests ever knew because they don't have Google Earth. They don't have a computer. They don't even leave their compound for the most part. So now the solution they came up with was, what if we take the stones out of the fields and we build walls around our church forests to keep the cattle out and make a boundary? So we're funding that. We're not funding walkways yet because we have to save the trees from the cattle. And so these little projects, we have over 100 forests now saved by paying for trucks to haul the stone and paying for gates that will go in so people can go to church. So a slightly different program from a walkway, but nonetheless a local project that will save what I call a genetic library. That little forest is a library of all the future of Ethiopia. All the insects, all the birds, all the animals live there. They don't live out in the field. So we have to be thinking, how do we save that genetic library? And here's a great photo of our first forested wall. This is outside of a town called Bahir Dar. Anybody been to Ethiopia? One last quiz. Oh, goody! It is an amazing place. Now we have, as I said, over 100 of these walls saving different church forests around the country. So then we can go back and develop ecotourism a second shot. And in this case, for a lot of these countries, how do we educate these kids? They have no books, no libraries, no electricity, no pencils, no shoes. You know, it's kind of a daunting thought. how we live versus how they live. So the other thing I've been working on is trying to think about how to help the kids learn about the value of their nature. And in this case, it was working with an Ethiopian colleague to write a children's book about trees and then have it translated. And every time someone buys this on Amazon, half the money goes to printing it in Amharic, their language, and we take those over and give them away to the kids. And I just want to say that the most joyful experience of my life is giving a child the first book they've ever owned. And this is it. They only own one book, and some of these girls are 16 years old. So that's like reminding us of how privileged we all are and how much we can do for them for very little effort. So with that, I want to close by saying I gave you the bad news, which is I don't know how we can stop a lot of the big things like agriculture and climate change. But the good news is we can do things that contribute to these forests. We can contribute to ecotourism. We can look for palm oil and do not buy it. We can educate kids about their future. We can do things for kids in other countries that might help them become the stewards of their forest. And maybe like Dan, you can come to the rainforest with me and we can all work on it together. So thank you for listening. Or you could take mine.
Is it working? We'll have a few minutes, I think, for questions, but I didn't want to completely run out of time by saying Meg is here at no expense to Cyprus, and I will make a contribution to the Tree Foundation tomorrow to thank her for being here. And close your ears, Larry. I don't want to take any interest away from the Acorn Fund, which sponsors this, but just saying, treefoundation.org.
I guess thank you, Dan. You can go on our website. If nothing else, please sign up for our free newsletter so you can keep track of our walkways since we're halfway done and all these kids programs. I am speaking tomorrow. There's a lot of teachers here that I've worked with because of these children's books. There's 2 children's books, and anyway, this is one of them that I have, and the other one's called The Most Beautiful Roof. The Most Beautiful Roof is required curriculum for 5th graders in 20 states, not my home state of Florida. I won't say any more about the politics of Florida, but unfortunately, so I do Zooms every week, 3 or 4, because teachers do this book and then they Google me and they find me and they corner me and they say, would you please talk to our kids? And now this new book is out, which is great for kids. But again, by reaching our own kids, another great thing you can do is buy a children's book about the rainforest and give it to a child you know. And if you don't have grandkids, you can give it to someone else's. It doesn't matter. But I think giving these books to libraries, doing things where we make sure the next generation is a little bit better with solutions than my generation. I'm kind of embarrassed because my generation grew up in the 70s. Remember all that rah, 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 hug a tree? And you were probably much more mature about it. But, I had a lot of friends that felt that. And now most of my friends are retiring and they're looking around at their big career in banking and insurance and saying, holy cow, how am I going to help my grandkids have a planet? So it is kind of an interesting world that we live in. So don't be shy to think about ways you can even maybe stop having plastic bottles in your place.
What age child is that book?
Sorry?
What age child?
Well, my mom said it was her favorite book ever because she struggles to understand whatever I do in life. She's like, what do you do with those leaves? So it's a beautiful story, but it would be good for anybody from age 3 to 10 to read out loud, but easy to read. The Most Beautiful Roof is the other one, and all these are on the website. You can look up under Tree Foundation. Would be more like from maybe 8 to 12. And I'm just about to publish a youth version of my memoir, which will be for teenagers from age 10 to 16. I finished it. It's being edited, so I hope it'll be out next year. because we have to reach them all. But we really have to reach adults too, and that's the hardest part. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, everybody.